The velvet seat is cool against the back of my legs. On stage, Headmistress Albright is a small, steady figure behind a large oak podium, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous auditorium. The air is thick with the scent of floor polish and expensive perfume. Beside me, my husband, Mark, shifts in his seat, the fabric of his tailored suit whispering in protest. He leans toward me, his breath warm against my ear, a smell of mint and self-satisfaction. "Look at this place," he murmurs, a low rumble of condescension. "All this pomp for a new gymnasium. You'd think they cured cancer. I don't turn." I keep my eyes fixed on the stage, on the way the light catches the silver in Mrs. Albright's hair. My heart is a slow, heavy drum against my ribs.
Steady. Calm.
It's a strange, unfamiliar piece. For months, my heart has been a frantic bird beating against a cage. Now it feels like a metronome.
Tick. Tock.
Counting down the final seconds of a life I'm about to burn to the ground. Mark thinks we're here because he's a potential donor, a big fish in the small, wealthy pond of Northwood Preparatory Academy's parent body. He thinks this is about him. He thinks everything is about him. He has no idea he's a guest at his own execution. Mrs. Albright pauses, taking a sip of water. The room holds its breath. And while the new gymnasium is a triumph of engineering, she continues, her voice gaining a new, richer timbre, it is not the project I am most proud to announce today. Today, we celebrate a new beginning. A new vision, Mark scoffs, a barely audible puff of air. Here we go. The shakedown, I feel a muscle in my jaw tighten, but I don't respond. I just watch. I watch as the headmistress's eyes seem to find mine across the sea of faces. A small, almost imperceptible nod. It's time. This vision, she says, her voice ringing with a genuine, powerful emotion, was made possible not by a committee or a board, but by the singular passion and breathtaking generosity of one individual. The air in that auditorium was so thick you could taste the privilege. If you've ever been in a room where you felt you didn't belong, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, please subscribe. It means more than you know. 6 months ago, our life was perfect, or, at least, it was constructed to appear that way. We lived in a sprawling modern house with more glass than walls, a place I had once dreamed of designing myself before I put those dreams away in a dusty box in the attic. Mark called it our sanctuary. I called it my beautiful prison. Mark was in finance, a shark in a Seville row suit. He moved through the world with an unshakable certainty that it was his for the taking. He provided. That was his favorite word. I provide, Clara. I make sure you and Lily have everything you could ever want, and we did. We had the cars, the vacations, the clothes. We had a life curated for a magazine spread. What we didn't have was a partnership. We had a hierarchy. Mark was the CEO of our family, and I was a highly compensated but ultimately powerless employee. My job was to manage the house, raise our daughter, Lily, and look beautiful at his corporate dinners. For 15 years, I had played the part. I'd convinced myself that giving up my career in architecture was a noble sacrifice for my family. I told myself that the gnawing emptiness I felt late at night, after Mark was asleep and the big glass house was silent, was just the normal ennui of a comfortable life. But it wasn't. It was the slow, creeping death of the woman I used to be. Lily was my sun, my everything. A brilliant, fiercely creative 13-year-old with a mind that moved at the speed of light and a heart that felt everything. She painted, she wrote poetry, she could take apart a computer and put it back together again. She was a supernova, and my life's purpose had narrowed to a single point, making sure her light was never, ever dimmed. For years, we had talked about Northwood Prep. It wasn't just about the prestige. It was about their legendary arts and sciences program, a place where a girl like Lily wouldn't have to choose between being an artist and an engineer. She could be both. They had a robotics lab that looked like something out of a sci-fi movie and an art studio with a real kiln and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the woods. It was a place built for her. When the acceptance letter arrived, it was like a state holiday in our house. Lily held it to her chest, her face glowing with a pure, unadulterated joy that made my own heart ache with love. She danced around the kitchen, the thick, cream-colored envelope clutched in her hand like a winning lottery ticket. "I did it, Mom. I actually did it," she screamed, laughing. I hugged her so tight, I thought my ribs might crack. "You did, baby," I whispered into her hair. "You earned every bit of this." We celebrated with ice cream for dinner and a movie marathon. For a few hours, the glass house felt like a home. The next evening, Mark came home. He dropped his briefcase by the door, the expensive leather sighing as it hit the polished concrete floor. He loosened his tie as he walked into the kitchen, a ritual that signaled the end of his day and the beginning of his reign. "Rough day?" I asked, my voice bright, buoyed by the lingering joy of Lily's acceptance. "The market is a fickle beast," he said, pouring himself a glass of scotch. "What's for dinner?" Lily, unable to contain herself, bounced into the room, waving the letter.
Dad.
"Dad, look. I got into Northwood." She held it out to him, her eyes shining. He took the letter, his expression unreadable as he scanned the first few lines. He set his scotch down. The clink of the glass on the marble countertop was unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. I watched his face, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I knew that look. It was his boardroom face. The one that came right before he gutted a deal or fired an underling. "Well," he said, folding the letter with surgical precision and handing it back to Lily.
"That's nice."
"Congratulations," Lily's smile faltered. "Nice? Dad, it's amazing. It's everything we talked about. We talked about you applying, Lily," he said, his voice level, devoid of emotion. "That's not the same as agreeing to it." He turned to me, his eyes cold. "Clara, can I see you in my study?" My study. Not our study. Not the office. His study. The dread in my stomach turned to ice. I followed him down the hall, the sound of my own footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Lily stood frozen in the kitchen, the letter drooping in her hand. The joy had already begun to drain from her face. He closed the heavy oak door behind us, shutting out the rest of the house. The study was his fortress of solitude, dark wood, leather-bound books he never read, and a massive desk that looked like it had been stolen from a railroad baron. He sat in his throne-like chair and gestured for me to sit in the smaller, less comfortable one opposite him. I remained standing. "What was that, Mark?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "You just crushed her." He steepled his fingers, looking at me over the top of them. "I'm being realistic, Clara. You're too emotional about this. Have you seen the tuition for this place? It's obscene. It's the cost of a luxury car every single year. We can afford it," I said, the words tasting like ash. "We spend more than that on your club membership and the upkeep on your classic Porsche." His eyes narrowed. "That's different. That's an investment. This is an indulgence. The public school in this district is one of the best in the state. It's more than good enough for her, good enough." The two most dangerous words in the English language. The words that had defined my own life for the last 15 years. I was a good enough wife. We had a good enough marriage. My quiet, comfortable life was good enough. I would not let him brand my daughter with those words. "No," I said, my voice suddenly clear and strong. "It's not good enough. Not for her. She's exceptional, and she deserves an exceptional education. This was the plan, Mark. We've been talking about this since she was in middle school." "It was your plan," he corrected me, his voice dangerously soft. "You've been filling her head with these grandiose ideas. It's time for a reality check. We're not paying it. It's fiscally irresponsible." The discussion is over. He picked up a pen and started tapping it on his desk. A clear dismissal. I stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between us.
He wasn't looking at me.
He was looking at a stock ticker on his computer screen. I was less important than the fluctuating value of some faceless corporation. In that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't a loud, shattering sound. It was a quiet, clean snap. The sound of a chain breaking, a lock clicking open. He thought the discussion was over. He had no idea it was just beginning. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I tried logic first. I spent an entire weekend creating a detailed financial plan. I printed out spreadsheets, colorful charts, and graphs. I showed him exactly where the money could come from. We could cancel the annual ski trip to Aspen he insisted on, the one where he spent most of his time networking at the lodge while Lily and I actually skied. We could sell one of his 3 cars. We could downgrade our wine club membership from connoisseur to enthusiast. I presented it to him on a Sunday evening, laying it all out on the vast, empty expanse of our dining room table. He glanced at it for less than a minute, a smirk playing on his lips. "This is cute, honey," he said, patting my hand. "You've been busy. But you don't understand how these things work. These aren't just expenses, they're part of our portfolio. They're part of our image, his image. So our image is more important than our daughter's future?" I asked, my voice rising. "Don't be so dramatic, Clara," he sighed, turning away. "She'll be fine. You're making this into a much bigger deal than it is." Logic had failed. So I tried begging. I hated it. It felt demeaning, like a dog rolling over to have its belly scratched. I caught him in a good mood one night, after he'd closed a big deal. I brought him his favorite scotch, sat beside him on the leather sofa in his study, and I pleaded. I talked about Lily's dreams, about the spark in her eyes when she talked about the school's science fair, about the way she lit up when she described their art program. I told him this wasn't just about books and grades. It was about finding her tribe, about being in a place where her brilliance would be celebrated, not just tolerated. He listened, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, his expression thoughtful. For a moment, a flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe he was finally hearing me. When I finished, my voice raw with emotion, he took a long sip of his drink and looked at me. "I admire your passion, Clara." "I really do," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "But my decision is final. It's a matter of principle." The hope died as quickly as it had been born. His principles were a fortress he hid behind, a set of arbitrary rules designed to reinforce his own authority. The worst part was Lily. She heard everything. The house, with its open-plan design and echoing surfaces, carried our hushed, angry arguments into every room. She tried to pretend she didn't hear, hiding in her bedroom with her headphones on, but I saw the change in her. The light in her eyes began to dim. She stopped talking about Northwood. She stopped talking about her future at all. She would come home from school, do her homework in silence, and retreat to her room. The vibrant, joyful girl who had danced around the kitchen was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful ghost. One afternoon, I found her in her room, staring at the acceptance letter. "It's okay, Mom," she said, her voice small and flat. "Dad's right. It's too much money. I don't want to be a problem. My daughter, my brilliant, beautiful daughter, thought she was a problem." That was the moment my desperation curdled into something else. Something cold and hard and sharp. It was rage. A pure, clean rage that burned away all the fear and helplessness. Mark hadn't just said no to a school. He had tried to teach our daughter that her dreams were an inconvenience. He was trying to shrink her to fit into the small, manageable box he had designed for her, just as he had done to me. And I would not let that happen. That night, I went up to the attic. I hadn't been there in years. It was a graveyard of my former life. Canvases from my college painting classes, boxes of old photographs, and in the corner, my old drafting table. Covered in a dusty sheet, it looked like a tombstone. I pulled a sheet off, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the bare bulb overhead. Underneath, tucked away in a leather portfolio, were the blueprints and sketches from a life I had almost forgotten. The life of Clara Evans, architect. Not Clara Evans, Mark's wife. I opened the portfolio, the smell of old paper and graphite filling the air. My fingers, soft and unused to this kind of work, traced the lines I had drawn 15 years ago. A fire that I thought had long since turned to ash stirred, a single, glowing ember in the ruins of my ambition. I would not let him win. I didn't know how, but I would find a way. This was no longer about a school. This was a war. My first forays back into the world of architecture were clumsy and humiliating. I reactivated my professional licenses and started reaching out to old colleagues. The responses were polite but cool. The industry had changed. The software I used to know was ancient history. People I had once considered peers now ran their own successful firms. They spoke a language of BIM modeling and parametric design that I didn't understand. One old friend, a woman named Sarah, who is now a partner at a major firm in the city, agreed to have coffee with me. She was kind, but her pity was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that threatened to suffocate me. "It's tough to get back in after so much time away, Clara," she said, stirring her latte. "The whole landscape has shifted. Maybe you could start with some residential work? A kitchen remodel, something small to build up your portfolio again." I smiled and thanked her, but inside, I was screaming. A kitchen remodel. I had once designed a cantilevered library that won a National Student Award. Now I was being advised to pick out countertops for suburbanites. I swallowed my pride and tried. I signed up for a freelance website. The jobs were soul-crushing. Design a new deck for my backyard. Budget $100. Need blueprints for a man cave in my basement. Must include a wet bar and space for a 90-inch TV. I took a few jobs, working late at night after Mark and Lily were asleep. I downloaded a free trial of the new drafting software, the subscription for which was an astronomical $400 a month. I spent hours watching tutorials, my eyes burning, relearning the basic skills that had once been second nature. The pittance I earned was a joke. It wouldn't cover a single textbook at Northwood, let alone the tuition. The inevitable explosion came a week later. Mark handled all the finances, of course, but he had a notification system set up for our joint accounts. Any charge over a certain amount, any new subscription, and he got an email. He confronted me when he got home from work, waving his phone in my face like a prosecutor presenting evidence. The charge for the full version of the drafting software, which I had forgotten to cancel after the trial ended, was displayed on the screen. "What is this, Clara?" he demanded, his voice dangerously calm. "What is ArchiCAD Pro, and why does it cost $400? We were in the kitchen. I was making dinner, trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy. I put down the knife I was using to chop vegetables, my hand suddenly slick with sweat. It's a software program," I stammered. "For design work." His eyes narrowed into slits. "Design work? What design work? Are you still on about this school nonsense? Are you trying to go behind my back?" "I'm trying to contribute," I shot back, my own anger flaring. "I'm trying to find a solution, since you refuse to even consider one." I thought if I could earn some money myself. He let out a short, barking laugh. It was the cruelest sound I had ever heard. "You? Earn money? Clara, be serious. You haven't worked in 15 years. What are you going to make? A few $100s designing someone's patio? It's pathetic. It's embarrassing." The words hit me like physical blows. Pathetic. Embarrassing. He saw my effort not as a sign of determination, but as a sad, desperate joke. "You are not to spend another dime on this foolishness," he said, his voice dropping to a low command. "I'm calling the credit card company and disputing the charge. And I think it's time we made some adjustments." The next day, my personal credit card, the one linked to our joint account, was declined at the grocery store. I called the company, my face burning with shame as people in line behind me sighed impatiently. The card had been canceled. That evening, Mark slid a new card across the dinner table. It was a prepaid debit card. "I've put your weekly allowance on this," he said, not a trace of irony in his voice. "For groceries and incidentals. Just so we can keep a better handle on things. To avoid any more misunderstandings and allowance." At 42 years old, I had been given an allowance by my husband. He was smiling, that tight, controlled smile that never reached his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought he had sealed the last escape route, locked the final door of my cage, and thrown away the key. He had no idea he had just handed me the one thing I needed most, the motivation to find a blowtorch. The deadline for the Northwood deposit was now just a few weeks away. The pressure was immense, a physical weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I was an architect without a project, a soldier without a weapon. My small acts of rebellion had been squashed, my resources cut off. Mark was watching me now, his casual questions about my day feeling more like interrogations. He was smug, confident that he had put an end to what he called my little fantasy. He thought that by controlling the money, he controlled me. He controlled my dreams, and by extension, Lily's. He was wrong. True desperation is a powerful creative force. It strips away the non-essential, clarifies the mind, and forces you to look in places you would never have dared to look before. For me, that place was the attic. I went up there again, not looking for a memory this time, but for an idea. A weapon. I sifted through boxes of my old life, the dust and the past clinging to me. And then I found it. It wasn't just my old portfolio. It was my thesis. My final university project, the one that had consumed me for an entire year. It was called The Living Hive. It wasn't just a building, it was an ecosystem. A design for a self-sustaining, modular community center built from sustainable materials, with integrated vertical farms, water recycling systems, and solar power. It was designed to be built in underserved urban areas, a place that could provide not just shelter, but food, education, and community. It was radical, ambitious, and wildly impractical for a student project. It had won the prestigious Chamberlain Prize for Innovation in Architecture, a fact I had almost completely forgotten. I had been so swept up in my new life with Mark back then, so eager to please him and fit into his world, that I had simply packed it away. Mark had called it a noble but naive little project, another one of his casual dismissals that had slowly eroded my confidence over the years. I sat on the dusty floor of the attic, the blueprints spread out around me. The lines were still sharp, the ideas still vibrant. I could feel the passion of the 25-year-old woman who had drawn them. A woman who believed she could change the world, one building at a time. A woman I barely recognized. A crazy, impossible idea began to form in my mind. It was a Hail Mary pass, a 1-in-a-million shot. I pulled out my laptop, the glow of the screen a small beacon in the dim attic. I looked up the Chamberlain Prize. I scrolled through the list of past judges. My breath caught in my throat. Arthur Vance. He had been the head of the judging panel that year. A legendary, almost mythical figure in the world of architecture, known for championing impossible projects. And now, Arthur Vance ran the Vance Foundation, a multi-billion-dollar philanthropic organization dedicated to funding disruptive and innovative solutions for modern urban living. My heart started to pound, a frantic, hopeful rhythm. It was insane. He probably got thousands of proposals a week. Why would he even look at one from a woman who hadn't worked in 15 years, an updated version of a student project from a lifetime ago? Because I had nothing left to lose. For the next 3 days, I lived a double life. By day, I was Clara, the perfect housewife, planning menus and running errands with my prepaid debit card. But at night, after the house was dark and silent, I would retreat to the attic with my laptop. I didn't just update the project. I resurrected it. I poured every ounce of my frustration, my rage, my desperate love for my daughter into the proposal. I updated the materials to reflect new technologies. I integrated smart grid systems. I developed a detailed, phased implementation plan. I wrote with a clarity and a passion I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just designing a building anymore. I was designing my own Declaration of Independence. Finding Arthur Vance's contact information was its own covert operation. It wasn't listed on the Foundation's website, of course. I spent hours digging through old university alumni networks, cross-referencing articles, and piecing together clues. Finally, on a deep dive into the archives of an architectural journal, I found it. An email address from a guest lecture he had given 7 years ago. It was probably defunct. It was probably a dead end. But it was the only lead I had. I composed the email. I rewrote it 100 times. I tried to sound professional, not desperate. Confident, not crazy. I attached the updated proposal, a massive file filled with renderings, blueprints, and financial projections. My hand hovered over the send button for a full 5 minutes. My whole body was shaking. This was it. The final, desperate shot in the dark. I closed my eyes, thought of Lily's face, and I clicked. The email disappeared into the ether, and the waiting began. The silence that followed was deafening. Every ping from my phone made my heart leap into my throat, only to crash back down when it was just a sale notification or a message from the PDA. A week passed. Then another. The Northwood deposit deadline was now a week away, a guillotine hanging over our heads. Mark, sensing my surrender, became magnanimous in his victory. He announced one evening at dinner that he had booked a surprise trip for us. A week at an all-inclusive resort in St. Bart's. A little celebration, he said, beaming. To get our minds off all this school stress and get back to what's important. It was a reward for my good behavior. A prize for finally accepting my place. He had even scheduled it for the exact week the deposit was due, a final, triumphant checkmate. Lily didn't even look up from her plate. She just pushed her food around, her face pale and listless. The fight was gone. He had won. He had successfully dimmed her light. I looked at my daughter, a ghost at our dinner table, and I felt a despair so profound it was like drowning. I had failed her. My wild, desperate plan had amounted to nothing. I was a fool for ever thinking I could stand up to him, for thinking an old dream could save us. The night before the deadline, I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs and sat in the dark kitchen, the bill from Northwood on the table in front of me. The number seemed to mock me. $25,000. An impossible sum. It might as well have been $1 million. This piece of paper was a tombstone for my daughter's dream and a testament to my own powerlessness. I put my head in my hands, the cold marble of the island pressing against my forehead. I was ready to give up. I would tell Lily in the morning that we would make the best of the public school. I would smile and pack for St. Bart's. I would go back to being the good wife, the quiet, manageable woman Mark wanted me to be. I would let the embers in the attic finally burn out. My phone, lying on the counter beside me, buzzed. A low, vibrating sound that seemed to shake the entire room. I ignored it. It was probably Mark, texting me from upstairs to come to bed. It buzzed again. With a heavy sigh, I picked it up. An email notification lit up the screen. I almost swiped it away. But then I saw the sender. Arthur Vance. My breath hitched. My fingers felt clumsy, numb, as I tapped the screen. The email was short. Just a few lines. But the words leaped off the screen and rearranged the world. Mrs. Evans, I apologize for the delay in my response. I have been traveling. I have reviewed your proposal for The Living Hive. To say I am impressed would be a gross understatement. It is not just a building, it is a paradigm shift. It is precisely the kind of visionary, disruptive project my foundation exists to support. I want to fund a pilot program. My team will be in touch tomorrow to discuss the details of a multi-million-dollar seed grant and the establishment of a new architectural foundation under your leadership. I need to meet with you. As soon as possible. Are you available tomorrow? I read it once.
Twice.
A third time. The words swam, then sharpened into focus. Multi-million-dollar. Your leadership.
Tomorrow.
It wasn't real.
It couldn't be.
It was a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and despair. But it was real.
The phone was solid in my hand.
The words were glowing on the screen. It wasn't just a lifeline. It was a battleship. A tidal wave.
It was a power so immense it terrified me.
I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I looked at the tuition bill on the counter. $25,000. A laughable, insignificant number. Then I looked at the email again. A cold, crystalline clarity settled over me. This was never just about the money. It was about power. Mark had used money to control me, to diminish me, to silence me. And now, I had been handed a weapon far more powerful than he could ever imagine. I walked over to the window and looked out at the perfectly manicured lawn, the dark, silent houses of my neighbors. My gilded cage. The glass walls suddenly seemed very, very fragile. I took a deep breath. The air tasted different. It tasted like freedom. I walked back to my phone and typed out a reply to Arthur Vance, my hand steady now. Yes, I wrote. Tomorrow would be perfect then. I made another call. I dialed the number for Northwood Preparatory Academy. It was late, but I hoped someone might be there. A tired-sounding security guard answered. I asked to be put through to the headmistress's emergency voicemail. "This is Clara Evans," I said, my voice low and even. "I'm calling about my daughter, Lily. I will be paying her full year's tuition tomorrow. But I'd also like to discuss making a donation. A very, very substantial donation. I have a few ideas for a new creative arts wing I'd like to fund. And I have one condition. For now, my donation is to remain completely anonymous." The next few months were a blur of clandestine activity. I was living two lives. In one, I was Clara, the dutiful wife, going through the motions of our hollow marriage. I feigned disappointment about the cancelled trip to St. Bart's. I told Mark I had a family emergency to attend to, a sick aunt he'd never met, and I played the part of the supportive spouse, nodding along as he talked about his triumphs in the market. He was so convinced of his victory, so cocooned in his own arrogance, that he never saw a thing. He noticed I was happier, more energized, but he attributed it to my finally coming to my senses. He had no idea that while he was at his office, I was in a different city, meeting with Arthur Vance, with lawyers, with accountants. I established my own foundation. I opened my own bank accounts, into which the first staggering wire transfer from the Vance Foundation landed with a quiet, digital thud that felt like a seismic event. I hired a small, fiercely loyal team. I was no longer just Clara Evans. I was the founder and principal architect of the Hive Project. My second life, my real life, was lived in secret phone calls, encrypted emails, and blueprints spread across a small, rented office space downtown that Mark knew nothing about. I worked with the Northwood administration, under the cloak of my anonymity, to design the new wing. It wasn't just a donation. It was a project. My project. I designed a space filled with light and possibility, with studios for painting and sculpture, a digital media lab, a small black box theater. A place where creativity was the core curriculum, not an elective. I called it the Albright Wing, in honor of the headmistress who had been my silent co-conspirator. Lily, of course, was now a student at Northwood. I had told Mark a story about a surprise scholarship from a distant relative's estate, a story so convoluted and sentimental he'd bought it without question, too pleased with himself for having won the initial argument to scrutinize the details. Seeing Lily thrive at Northwood was my fuel. The light was back in her eyes, brighter than ever. She had found her tribe. She was happy, challenged, and becoming the extraordinary young woman I always knew she was. Every tuition payment, every check I wrote to the school was a quiet act of defiance, a secret victory. The day of the Founders' Day assembly arrived. It was the day the new wing would be officially dedicated. Mrs. Albright had insisted I attend. "It's your day, too," she had said over the phone. "It's time." I convinced Mark to come by framing it as a major networking event. "Half the board members of your company have kids here, Mark," I'd said casually. "It would be good for you to be seen." His ego, as always, was his weak spot. He agreed instantly. So here we are, sitting in the plush velvet seats. Mark is bored, restless, checking his watch. He leans over again. "How much longer is this going to go on?" "I have a tea time at 3 not much longer," I say, my voice calm. On stage, Mrs. Albright is reaching the crescendo of her speech. This benefactor, who we have known only as the founder, did more than write a check, she says, her voice filled with a reverence that makes the hairs on my arms stand up. They gave us a vision. They worked with our architects, with our teachers. They personally designed the space our children will learn and create in for generations to come. They showed us that the most powerful structures aren't built with just steel and glass, but with passion and purpose. Mark rolls his eyes, so hard I can almost hear it. "Oh, please," he mutters. "Get on with it," Mrs. Albright smiles. This person insisted on anonymity. They did not want praise or recognition. But I insisted, because I believe it is vital for our students, especially our young women, to see who the builders and the visionaries in our world truly are. They need to know that strength and creativity and power can come from the most unexpected of places. She pauses, and the silence in the auditorium is absolute. It feels as if the entire building is holding its breath. My heart is no longer a steady drum. It is a thunderclap. This is it. This benefactor has given me permission to break their anonymity for just this moment, she continues, her eyes finding mine again across the room. Because they believe in the power of showing our daughters that mothers can build more than just homes. They can build futures. The spotlight operator, cued perfectly, begins to swing a bright, white beam across the audience. Mark watches it, a flicker of interest on his face, probably wondering which of his business rivals is about to get the glory. The beam sweeps past the mayor, past the head of the school board. It continues its slow, deliberate path. And then it stops. It stops on me. The light is blindingly white, warm on my skin. For a split second, there is nothing but the light and the silence. And then, Mrs. Albright's voice, clear as a bell, rings out through the auditorium. So please join me in thanking the visionary architect behind the new Albright wing and our school's newest major founder, Mrs. Clara Evans. A collective gasp ripples through the auditorium. It's a soft, sibilant sound, like the tide going out. Hundreds of faces turn towards me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and astonishment. The applause starts slowly, a few hesitant claps, then builds into a wave of sound, a roaring ovation that washes over me. But I don't hear it. I don't see any of them. I only see Mark. I turn my head slowly to look at my husband. The transformation of his face is a thing of terrible beauty. It happens in stages, like a building collapsing in slow motion. First, there is confusion. He blinks in the glare of the spotlight, his brow furrowed. He looks from me to the stage and back again, as if trying to solve a complex equation that doesn't compute. Clara, he mouths, the sound lost in the applause. Then, the confusion gives way to disbelief. A nervous, twitching smile appears on his face. He thinks it's a mistake. A joke. He looks around, expecting someone to correct it, to swing the spotlight to the right person. But the light stays on me. The applause grows louder. And then, finally, the disbelief shatters, and it is replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. The blood drains from his face. His jaw goes slack. His eyes, wide and staring, are fixed on me. They're filled with a dawning horror. The kind of look a man has when he realizes the ground he's been standing on his entire life has just dissolved into thin air. He doesn't see his wife. He sees a stranger. A ghost. A creature of immense and terrifying power who has been living in his house, sleeping in his bed, all while plotting a revolution he was too arrogant to ever imagine. He finally understands. The scholarship, my good mood, the secret phone calls he must have half heard but dismissed. It all clicks into place in his mind, not as a relief, but as a verdict. I stand up. My legs feel surprisingly steady. I smooth down the front of my dress, a simple, elegant sheath I bought with my own money. I look across the auditorium to where Lily is sitting with her class. Her friends are all looking at her, whispering. But Lily is just staring at me. Her mouth is a perfect O of surprise. Her eyes are wide, and in their depths, I see the same shock as her father's, but it's quickly being replaced by something else. A slow dawning, brilliant, fiercely proud understanding. She gets it. She gets all of it. A slow smile spreads across her face. It's the brightest I've ever seen her light shine. I give a small, dignified nod to Mrs. Albright, a queen acknowledging her court. Then I begin to walk towards the aisle, towards the stage. The applause is deafening now. As I pass Mark's seat, he reaches out, his hand grabbing my arm. His touch is cold, his grip surprisingly weak. Clara, he whispers, his voice a dry, cracking rasp. What is this? What have you done? I don't look at him. I gently, but firmly, remove his hand from my arm. I keep walking. I can feel his eyes on my back, burning. He's not just confused anymore. He's not just shocked. He's afraid. He has just realized that the woman he thought he owned, the woman whose world he could control with a prepaid debit card, just bought the entire building he was sitting in. He has just realized that he is no longer the CEO. He is not even an employee. He is a trespasser in my world now, and his eviction is long overdue. The reception afterwards is a surreal whirlwind. I am surrounded. Parents who once gave me polite, dismissive nods now shake my hand with vigor, their eyes shining with a newfound respect. Board members clap me on the shoulder, calling me a visionary. People want to know about my work, about my foundation, about the Living Hive. For the first time in 15 years, people are not asking me what my husband does. They are asking me what I do. I see Mark moving through the crowd on the other side of the room. He looks lost, a ghost at a feast held in his own home. He's trying to smile, to network, but his eyes keep darting towards me. He's watching me, trying to understand the new social calculus. He sees his colleagues, his rivals, all gravitating towards me, the new center of gravity in the room. He finally makes his way over to me, a glass of champagne in his hand, his face a carefully constructed mask of pleasant surprise. "Darling," he says, his voice a little too loud. He tries to loop his arm through mine, an act of public reclamation. "This is just incredible. I'm so proud. Why didn't you tell me?" I step away just enough for his arm to fall into the empty space between us. I look him directly in the eye. My voice is quiet, but it cuts through the noise around us. "We have a lot to talk about, Mark," I say. "But not here." I turn away from him and back to the conversation I was having with the head of the City Planning Commission, leaving him standing there, his smile frozen on his face, his arms still slightly bent, as if holding on to a person who is no longer there. Later that night, the glass house is silent. The air is thick with unspoken words. Lily is at a sleepover, a small mercy I am profoundly grateful for. I am in the living room, waiting. Mark comes in, having already poured himself a large scotch. The confrontation, when it comes, is not the screaming match I had expected. It's worse. It begins with anger. "What the hell was that today, Clara? You made a fool out of me. You stood there and let them applaud you for spending my money." "It wasn't your money, Mark," I say calmly, holding up a folder I had placed on the coffee table.
He snatches it from me.
He opens it. Inside are the incorporation papers for my foundation, the contracts with Advanced Foundation, and my new business bank statements. He flips through the pages, his face growing paler with each one. He sees the numbers. The initial seed grant. The operating budget. The figures are staggering, dwarfing his own annual income. The anger in his face flickers and dies, replaced by a desperate confusion. The anger was a shield, and without it he is exposed. Then comes the pleading. "Clara, honey, I don't understand," he says, his voice soft, wheedling. He sits down next to me on the sofa, tries to take my hand. "If you had this resource, why didn't you just tell me?
We could have been partners in this.
We could have done this together." I pull my hand away. "Partners?" I ask, and a short, bitter laugh escapes my lips. "You don't want a partner, Mark. You want an accessory. You had every chance to be a partner when this was just about our daughter's happiness. You had every chance to listen. But you weren't interested. You were only interested in control. The final stage is fear." He finally sees the abyss that has opened up between us. He finally understands that the rules of our entire marriage have been rendered null and void. "So what now?" he whispers, his voice small. "What does this mean for us?" I stand up and walk to the window, looking out at the reflection of the room in the dark glass. I see myself, and I see him, a small, diminished figure on the sofa. "It means I've filed for divorce, Mark," I say to my own reflection. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours tomorrow." The sound he makes is something between a gasp and a sob. The Titan collapses. The man who built his entire identity on a foundation of power, control, and money has lost all three in the span of a single afternoon. Watching him crumble is not the gleeful, triumphant moment of revenge I might have once fantasized about. It's just quiet and sad and deeply, profoundly liberating. 6 months later, I am standing in my new office. It's not large or grand, but it's mine. The walls are covered in blueprints and renderings for the first Living Hive Community Center, which is scheduled to break ground in the spring. The view from my window isn't of a manicured lawn, but of the bustling, chaotic, beautiful city. I am no longer living in a glass house. I am living in the world. The divorce was messy, of course. Mark fought it, not because he loved me, but because he couldn't stand the public humiliation of the narrative, the powerful financier whose wife left him after becoming more successful than he was. But in the end, the numbers didn't lie. My foundation, my company, my assets, they were all mine, created without a single cent of his money. The glass house was sold. I kept nothing from that life, except my daughter. The door to my office opens and Lily walks in, dropping her backpack on the floor. She's wearing a Northwood sweatshirt, and there's a smudge of clay on her cheek. She's holding a small, lopsided sculpture of a bird. Advanced ceramics was awesome today, she says, placing the bird on my desk. It's supposed to be a phoenix, I smile, picking it up. It's beautiful. I love it, I say. She looks around the office, at the plans on the wall. Is it weird, she asks, that I'm more proud of you for this than for the whole school thing? No, I say, my voice thick with emotion. It's not weird at all, she smiles, that brilliant smile of hers.
Good.
So, can we get pizza? I'm starving. I look from my daughter's bright, hopeful face to the blueprints on my wall. I didn't just pay for her school. I didn't just build a new wing. I tore down a prison and built a future. And in doing so, I finally, after all these years, came home to myself. That blueprint on my desk wasn't just for a building, it was for a new life. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever had to fight for a dream someone else tried to bury, I'd love to hear your version. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.